time we talked about academic citation as the last thing, right? So last time we looked at academic citations. So can you bring up the handout from last time? So the handout from last time, academic citations, right? So we talked about the fact that there are two kinds of citations, right? Based on whether or not your citation is the part of syntax, right? For example, there is the non-integral, right? Non-integral, and then integral citation. So the non-integral citations are citations that are not part of the syntax. The sentence syntax, in other words, is not part of the prepositional phrase, is not part of the noun phrase or anything like that. So if you have things like evaluation is evasive, is hard to define, and then you cite like this, Krista 2015. So this is an example of a non-integral citation, right? Because it's not part of the sentence, the syntax of the sentence, the grammar of the syntax, the sentence. But if you have things like Krista, that evaluation is evasive, is argued by Krista 2015, or is proposed by Krista 2015. This is an integral type, right? This is an integral type because you see the by here and it's part of the syntax of the sentence. So there are two major types, right? And we use citations for many different functions. And this is on page 7, if you have that. This is on page 7, if you look at the table here, right? If you look at the table dealing with the functions of citation, of course, the main function of citations is to attribute the idea to someone, right? To attribute the idea to someone, attribute. It doesn't matter whether it's an integral or non-integral type, but your purpose is to attribute the idea to someone, right? For example, according to critic Laura Mulvey, 1975, in binary looking relations meant to assume the active role, and so on. So this is the main purpose of citation, right? That you will see a lot of examples, right, for. And then the second type is example. Right? When you use citations for this purpose, for the purpose of giving examples, you usually see the word for example, the phrase for example, or for instance. So you give the research as an example to support your idea like that. And then the third one, further reference. Further reference. Typically, when you cite things, you will use the expression for interested readers see, or see further, Highland 2001, like that. Typically you'll see that, right? Because of the limitation of space, or because it's too complicated to be discussed in your paper, so you refer the reader to that source, to that original source for additional information. Because your paper might not deal with that information directly, or because you have limited space, so you refer the reader. So that's okay too. Typically in the footnote or in the endnote, you do that. And then statement of use or application. In this paper, I adopt Highland's model of stance, so you indicated clearly that you will adopt that definition like that. So this is a statement of use. Statement of use or adaptation. And then evaluation is another use, another function. So you cite someone in order to evaluate the idea, whether it's valid or not valid, whether it has a shortcoming or not, whether it has strength or not, right? So evaluation is also common as attribution, okay? As common as attribution. And then you can also establish links between sources. So typically you'll see a lot of citations, a lot of cited works strung together, like Krista 2015, Highland 2016, like that. So it means that these works, these studies show the same tendency or show the same argument or make similar argument like that, make similar claims. So when you string many citations, many sources together, it means that you try to link them, you try to synthesize the idea or the information, right? And the list can go on and on, like Krista 2015, Highland 16, and blah, 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 right? So typically you want to establish or synthesize the information that this is the sources that you have come across. And this is good to show that you are knowledgeable. You are knowledgeable. This is a technique that shows that you are familiar with the literature, right? That you have read so many sources and you can synthesize the idea or synthesize the information. And then the last one is comparison of one's own findings or interpretation with other sources. So in this case, you compare two studies or more, two or more studies, right? As in previous studies, Highland 2001, the present study, and so on. So these are the things that, or the functions that people use citations for, okay? And you will have to use, typically all of these things occur in your paper, okay? But the most frequently occurring functions are attribution and evaluation, right? And statement of use is also frequent, right? And on page 8, so now you know the two types of citation, right? Types of citation, and also you know the functions of citation. So I have I have taken different extracts from academic papers. So what I would like you guys to do now is to tell me in each of the extracts, to tell me what type of citation it is. What type of citation it is it integral or non-integral? That's easy, right? Because if it's an integral, to be an integral, it has to be part of the syntax. It could be in the prepositional phrase, or it could be in the subject position, it could be in the object position, whatever, right? So that's an integral. For it to be a non-integral type, it cannot be part of the syntax, typically in the parentheses like that, okay? So first tell me whether it's integral or non-integral, and second, what type of function does it serve? Does it serve to attribute the idea to an author, to a researcher? Does it serve as just an example? Does it serve as a statement of use, and so on? How to do this? How to determine the function? Well, just look at the context, right? Just look at the context and see what the author uses it to do. Let's see. In number 1, you guys look at number 1, from veterinary science, right? This one, you don't see any citation, right? You don't see anything. The animal health and veterinary group has a chief veterinary officer together with an undersecretary of animal health. There is no citation here. So everything here is what we call plain averral, right? So this is an exception. So this is an exception, and that could happen also, right? Especially if you have quoted that source already in somewhere near this sentence, you don't quote twice like that. Or if it's common knowledge, you don't have to quote, right? Number 2, agricultural economics. Number 2 here, this idea is formalized, right? This idea is formalized by Porter and van der Linde, 1995, who argued the imposition of environmental standards can induce technological invention which may more than offset the cost of complying with the imposed standard. So is this integral or non-integral? This is integral, right? So this is integral, right? And this idea is formalized by Porter and van der Linde, who argue that blah, right? So the function, what would be the function? It cannot be an example, right? Because typically you will see words like for example or for instance. If it is to be used that way, it cannot be further reference because you don't refer the reader to find something else. It is not the statement of use because you don't say, oh, I adopt Porter and van der Linde's idea like that. And link, no link because there's only one person. And evaluation, you don't see whether it's good or bad, right? It's effective or not effective, the idea. So perhaps attribute, right? Attribution. So it's used for attribution here, right? You attribute the argument imposition of environment standards, you attribute that to Porter and van der Linde, right? So one more, agricultural botany, right? cDNA clones have now been used to detect RFLPs, whatever these things are, cDNA and RFLPs, in a number of plant species, including barley, potato, apple, lettuce, and strawberries, right? So here, is it integral or non-integral citation? Non, right? Non-integral citation because it's not part of the syntax at all, right? So you just put these things in the parentheses, right? And these people are not important, right? Because if these people are important, you would use them as the subject, right? Like Kleinhoff and all, 1993, use cDNA clones to detect blah, 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 right? But the name of the people are not important. That's why you put them in the parentheses and in the non-integral type of citation, right? So as for the function, what's the function? The things that I can see here would be establishing links between these people. They are different in the sense that they do experiments on different crops, right? Different types of plants, barley, potato, apple, lettuce, and strawberries. But the commonality that they share is the fact that they use the cDNA clones, right? They use the cDNA clones to detect RFLPs, right, in many species. So that's the link between them, right? So we call that this is the establishing links between sources, right? And you use this in order to, again, in order to show that you are knowledgeable about this issue, and also to show that this is a common thing, common way, common method to do to do the detection of RFLPs and so on. So number 4, let's look at number 4, agricultural economics. In number 4, we have Masuda 2015, and that's the page, states that in government departments where ministers move from one department to another quickly with only a short stay in any one, and then you see the direct quotation in the quotation marks, right? So this is the first one that we see here. Is it non-integral or integral type? Integral type, right? And Masuda functioning as the subject of the clause, right? So this means that we pay attention to who argues it, right, which is Masuda. So that's why we have him in the subject position and that's why we use the integral type, okay? Because Masuda, we want to attribute, right? We want to attribute the idea to Masuda, and Masuda is the person who argues about that, so he's important. So this function is attribution of the idea. Masuda states that, and so on. And his words are important. That's why you see the direct quotations. There may develop a department policy like that, okay? And then similarly, in the the other part, the latter part of the sentence, we have Krista 2014 coined the term cooptation in the quotation marks also, because that's the term that he came up with in organizations, which he defines as a process of absorbing new elements into the leadership or policy and so on. So this one is also a integral type of citation, right? Krista functioning as the subject again, right? And the function would be to attribute, right? To attribute, in this case, the term, right? The term and the definition to Krista, right? So the two cases are similar. Masuda and Krista here are similar in that they are both integral citations, and the function is to attribute the idea or the word cooptation to the author, to the researcher, okay? So we have about 10 left, 10 or more, around 10 left. So I have you work in pairs, right? So this pair will do, we already did 4, right? 5 and 6, so 5 and 6. Mankyong and Songho, 7 and 8, and then 7 and 8, and then 9 and 10, right, Yuna? 9 and 10, and then 11 and 12, and 13. Okay? So I'll give you about maybe 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Okay, so let's look at number 5. Let's look at number 5. Let's look at number 5. So what might be the opinion, your guys' opinion on number 5?
This is non-integral, and the function might be evaluation.
For this one, it's integral, right? Do you see the quotations, the direct quotations there? The direct quotations. Wealthy beer barons with harrowing ermines of draymen battle for representation of Southwark for much of the century Gray, right? So in this case, you not only quote the name Gray 2010, but you also quote his words, right? So in this case, it's integral. It's integral. You see this is the same thing, right? We have the same thing. Number 5? Yeah, number 5. You see that there is whether beer barons with hireling ermines and so on. That's part of the quotation, right? So it's part of the sentence, isn't it? So if it's part of the sentence, then it's integral, right? It's integral, right? Because of, you see where, and then where, wealthy, blah, 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 and then Gray, right? Gray 2010. We just don't only quote that, right? We quote here also, right? So the whole thing is the citation, right? So in this case, it's part of the where, right? If you take it out, the where is left hanging, right? Without anything, so it's integral, right? So it's integral. So what's the function?
Evaluation.
Because
It's his opinion.
I'm sorry?
He is saying wealthy beer barons with the quotation
One of the worst areas, you see, one of the worst areas was probably Southwark, right? He says, this is the author, right? Where, and this is the word of Gray. Wealthy beer barons with hireling ermines of draymen battle, blah, 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 for much of the century, right? And then Gray. And then examples can be found in most towns and so on, right? So in this case, I think it's just attribution, normal attribution. Because he wants to, if you look at the context here, he started the paragraph off with drinking and gambling were the great passions of the age, right? Drinking and gambling were the great passion of the age, enjoyed and practiced by all classes, right? And then even in the second sentence, members of parliament were often elected amid a plenitude of drink, given freely to the voters. So here we are talking about the fact that drinking and gambling were prevalent in that period. So he quotes from Gray. The writer quotes from Gray that one of the worst areas was probably Southwark. Why is that? Because Gray says that in that area, wealthy beer barons with high-rolling mines of draymen battle for representation of Southwark, like that. So in my opinion, it's just to attribute that quotation to be coming from Gray, and that whole thing supports his claim that drinking and gambling are prevalent, and so on. Okay. And we say that it's integral here because the quoted part, you see, we don't only quote his name, Gray 2010, but we also quote the words from him, right? And these words are embedded within the what you call relative clause with where, right? So it's integral in this case. Okay. What about number 6? Number 6. Christine Brooke, right? We have the same thing. Christine Brooke Rose, 1958, in her A Grammar of Metaphor, that's the name of the book, provides a classification of forms of metaphor. So is that integral or non-integral? Integral, right? Christine Brooke functioning as the subject, right, of the sentence, so it's an integral type. And the function is? Link, or if you read on, you see, however, her categorization is perhaps unprincipled or something like that. So perhaps the function would be, is it good or not good? According to the writer. So she did that, right? She provides a classification of forms of metaphor, right? And then, however, her categorization is unprincipled, maybe, right? So evaluation, right? So the writer is evaluating the fact that her classification is not good, right? So in this case, it's evaluation. So the context will tell you why the author uses that particular citation, right? Number 7, the next pair.
Number 7 is non-integral, and the function is
This is not integral? Integral. Work, you see, work of F.R. Lewis. You see, work, we have the same thing, right? Number 7, work of F.R. Lewis. Work of F.R. Lewis. Of is a prepositional phrase, right? And you have the guy's name, F.R. Lewis. 그래서 is integral, right? Work of is a prepositional phrase. So you don't just look at the number, meaning you don't look at the year only, e.g. 1936, 1967, you don't look at that. You have to include the words that we quote from, if any, if there is any word, and also the name. Because here the name is F.R. Lewis, right? So it's part of the sentence, so it's integral, okay? This is integral. And the function? Yes, I agree. So example, right? You can say information on author from an inserted privileged position. As an example, the work of F.R. Lewis is in that category, right? Number 8, film screenplay written by Stanley Kubrick and Arthur Clarke, 1968. Integral or non-integral? Yes, integral is part of the sentence, right? By Stanley Kubrick and Arthur Clarke. And the function? Evaluation? Evaluation? Why do you think so? Why do you think so? Because you see, this passage cannot be characterized as a prototypical SF? Perhaps. This one is not clear because I don't know what this passage refers to. So if it refers to the passage by these two guys, then it's evaluation. If not, then it would be the default category attribution. Okay? So this one you need more context. Right? Depending on what this message refers to. Number 9, next pair. Ism, I don't know what ism is, but claims to objectivity that have been increasingly questioned in the past 20 or so years by writers from Derrida to Lakoff. So here we have what type of citation? Integral or non-integral? Yes, integral, right? From, you see, from Derrida, right? From Derrida 1975. From as a prepositional phrase. And the function? Source or examples. Source is attribute, right? Source is attribution. Example is a different one. So pick one. Pick one. Pick one.
Okay,
Example. Example. Or you can also argue that it establishing links between several authors since 1975, Derrida, 1975 to 1987. Right? So two meanings, two functions are possible, establishing links or examples, rather than attribution. Okay? Number 10. Number 10, what type of citation is it? Integral or non-integral? Integral, right? You see, in the spirit of crisis, right? In the spirit of crisis. So of crisis is integral. And what's the function? Attribution. Or in this case, I think more likely is the link. You see, if you look at the sentence before, the overall communicative process involving an utterer and a receiver, right? So that's the idea. Very much in the implied spirit of Grice. In other words, this is the same as in Grice's idea. So that's why I say that it's establishing links, right? So he links the idea of communicative process involving an utterer and a receiver to the idea of Grice. Although not exactly the same, but it's in the spirit of Grice's, meaning Grice's ideas are similar, like that. Number 11. Number 11.
Number 11 is non-integral because the name of the is inside the quotation mark. It doesn't serve as subject to object. But we're not sure about the word from.
This one is integral. You have from Grice. If it were only Grice 1975, then it would be non-integral something else. But here we have from. So if you take out Grice, then from who, right? So it is kind of dangling, right? So we consider that integral, right? Because it's part of the syntax, right? And the function, attribution. The function is attribution. The value of the model, not Grice's model, right? The value of the model that he's proposing is not only in recasting the traditional notion of cooperative principle and so on. Okay. 12. Yes, integral, right? Follows Van Dyck, 1977. If you take out Van Dyck's, then this approach follows blank. It doesn't work, right? So it's integral, and the function is, yes, statement of use. This approach, my approach, follows someone, right? I adopt that model, and so on. Okay. Number 13. Integral. Eggmeyer is the subject. Ekmeyer points out, right? So it's the subject, so it's surely integral. And the function is, yes, attribution. He points out that blah, blah, blah. Number 14, nobody, right? So number 14 is, where do we have? David Newham, right? In The Guardian, 24th of July, right? So in this case, what has been cited? David Newham, right? His word has been cited. David Newham calls the film, right, postmodernism. So we cite David Newham, right? So in this case, it's integral, right, because it's the subject. Though David Newham calls the film postmodernism, right? Let's see. The function is attribution here, right? He calls it postmodernism. Number 15, we have Fowler, 1986, Simpson, 1990, Leach and Short, 1981. So all of these are non-integral, right? Because if we take them out, they don't interrupt or interfere with our understanding of the syntax of the sentence, right? So they are examples, right? They are examples. Factors such as the narrative point of view, which Fowler, Simpson study, the presentation of verbalization, Leach and Short, and so on. They are examples, right? 16, Ekmeyer, 1989, concludes, so in this case, integral, functioning as a subject, integral, and the function is just attribution. Number 17, deriving from and slightly correcting Ekmeyer, 1989. This part is integral, right? Deriving from who, right? Ekmeyer, if you remove that out, then it would be deriving from blank, right? Which wouldn't work. So the function would be evaluation, attribution as the first function. And in the parentheses, you see, and slightly correcting is the minor function of evaluation. So there are two functions here. First, deriving from is to tell the source, right? To tell the source is then the attribution. And then also the writer is evaluating the source, slightly correcting, meaning that something wrong. You have to correct it, right? So what you can do with this kind of thing is that you can analyze how people use sources in their writing, native speakers versus non-native speakers, and what type of citation would appear more frequently and in what field, right? For example, in the scientific fields like biology, chemistry, people tend to use the non-integral type because the non-integral types mean that the author or the writers, the original writers or the authors are not important. So that's why you can have them in the non-dominant position, non-theme position, right? So you just cite the name, Krista 2015, like that, in order to show that the idea here is more important than the person. The idea or the experiment is more important than the person who does it or the person who argues about it, right? So in scientific fields, people tend to use the non-integral type more often than the integral type. But in the humanities, like our field, or in linguistics, people tend to use the integral type. Krista argues that, Krista states that, Krista defines that, and so on. So, and then there may be also differences between native speakers or advanced writers and also novice writers, how they can differ in terms of the type, the functions, and also the types of citations that they use. And you can be aware of the distinction and the different functions in your own writing as well for this thing. On the next page, you'll see that when we cite from someone, if it is to be a integral type, right? You integrate, you combine, you include the source in your sentence. You can select from maybe 20 or 30 verbs, right? And when you select, you do evaluate the source also. You see that table? There are 3 columns in the table, right? Less endorsing, meaning that you don't really agree. You don't really agree. Less endorse. You don't support, you don't agree. Not totally, but you don't agree totally. You have some commitment, you have some reservation, right? Less endorsing. So you can use verbs like claim, so you don't agree totally. Contend, suggest, argue, in his opinion, or believe, or think, or propose, right? Not necessarily that you agree with the author or the writer. Or if you are in between agreeing and non-agreeing, you can use more neutral shades, nuances, say or write, comment, state, declare, cite, note, explain, according to, and so on, right? Just to indicate that this is the source, just to attribute the idea or the quotation to the source. But if you are more in agreement, tend to agree, you would use one of the verbs from the last one, more endorsing. Affirm, confirm, agree, concur, maintain, show, demonstrate, establish, and point out. So you can select from this range of verbs here, and it's meaningful which one you select, right? Because it shows whether you agree or not agree, and in what position, whether you are in the neutral position or not, right? And also the formula, the formulaic expressions that you use when you quote, when you cite, is also important, right? So the next table gives you that kind of share, different shares of responsibility, right? If you look at the first column, responsibility, you see writer, shared, and author, right? The writer here, meaning you are the writer, you are the writer. Shared, meaning the responsibility lies equally. The responsibility is equal between you and the original author, right? And the last row is author, right? Author meaning that the responsibility lies with the original author, right? And the next column is textual voice, meaning whose voice is it, right? The different share between you and the original author. Writer, monologic, meaning that it's your voice, totally 100% your voice, monologic, under writer, right? Totally your voice, totally your responsibility, like that, okay? You don't drag the original author into this statement, right? None, author is none, right? You see, because you don't give the fair share. You don't give any share to the original author. As an example, you can say the moon may be made of cheese. That's your word, totally your word. No indication that you borrow it from him, no indication of the source. It's totally your word. So it's monologic, meaning it's your responsibility, it's your voice, totally 100%, right? And then in this middle row, you have 3 different types, right? That is shared. But how is it shared? If you take more responsibility, writer, this is you, right? And then more than author, the original author, meaning that your voice is dominant, right? Your voice is the dominant voice, and the author, the original author's voice is subordinate, meaning that he's not as strong. His voice is not as strong as yours. So you can say the moon may be made of cheese, and then CX 1999. You see, CX 1999, that's the further reference, right? So further reference thing, so that This is the strong opinion of you, right? Strong responsibility is on you. But he may say the same thing. So go and check that out. So that's what you are doing here. C, X 1999. But if you want to indicate that the responsibility is equally shared, corresponding, equally shared, you can say as X 1999 points out the moon may be made of cheese. So if you use point out, if you use the word point out, it means that you agree, more endorsing. You see, from that table, more endorsing. The last one, point out. Point out means that you support the original author. If you say as X points out, meaning that I agree with him, I agree with his convincing argument. So the responsibility is shared equally. Right? But on the other hand, if you want the original author to have a more dominant voice, you would use X points out that the moon may be made of cheese. Here, when you don't use as X points out, as X point out, but you say X points out that you agree with the original author. But because he's the subject, you see, X points out that. In this case, you give more prominence to him rather than as. Okay? So the syntax also matters, right? Whether you say it as the, I don't know, prepositional phrase as X points out, or X points out that. So here, this is the theme, right? X is the theme, so it means that he's important, right? And you show that you agree with him, but more important is this, is the theme, him as a subject. But if you say as X point out, blah, right? Here, this is more important than X point out. Right? So in this case, your voice is more, is kind of equally distributed in comparison to his original, to the author's original voice. And then if it's the last case where the author's voice is monologic, meaning that he's dominant, 100% dominant, you just use X argues that, meaning that you don't quite agree with him when you use the word argue, right? Argue, you have some reservation, and it's not your responsibility, like that, right? Or according to X, the moon may be made of cheese, and so on. So what you use here matters. What matters includes the syntax and also the verbs that you use, right? The kind of the type of citation, whether it's the non-intrical, right, or intrical, so it matters. So when you cite from people's sources, different sources in your paper, please consider this, right? Which one I want to highlight? Do I want to highlight my own voice? Do I want to highlight the original author's voice? Or do I want to highlight that I have a fair share, the equal share with him, and so on, right? So keep this in mind. And then, as I said, there's disciplinary differences between different fields also, right? That some fields rely on quotations more heavily than others, such as in the humanities. If you do philosophy, if you do history, you need to quote a lot, right? And you might have a lot of direct quotations, right? But in mechanical engineering or marketing, they might not have a lot of direct citations because they just want to refer to the original idea without the original wording, right? And the type of the verb, the type of verbs that they use, this is on the last page, might be different also. In the science, in the scientific fields, biology, physics, electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, you use a lot of verbs that have to do with experiment. For example, find, report, show, observe, right? Because these fields depend heavily upon experiments. So you have a lot of experiment verbs like observe that, he finds that, he found that, he reported, he developed the model, and so on, right? But in sociology, English literature, or even to a certain degree in linguistics, you will see a lot of speaking verbs like argue, assert, claim, comment, declare, speculate, discover, concede, and so on. Discuss, analyze, right? So you will see a lot of these verbal verbal verbs, verbs that have to do with speaking in these fields, because what they talk about and what they do are different in these fields, right? So you have to be careful and select different verbs, right? And the choice of verbs is important, right? And what I would like to talk about before we leave this topic is, this is in your new handout. This is in the appendix, right? On page 10. On page 10, I give you an appendix as your reference. This is in the new handout for today on page 10, right? This is in the part of the appendix, right? Some people don't know how to use quotations, meaning when to quote and when to not quote, right? Here we are talking about this type of quotation. Direct, this is direct, right? Direct quotations. Meaning that sometimes you quote directly. You need to include the original, right? The original author's words, right? So this is on page 10 in the new handout, right? Page 10 on the new handout, appendix, right? When do you use direct quotations? When you have reasons for doing it. Abdul, can you find? Page 10, yeah. When do you use direct quotations? When you have reasons for it. If there's no reason, there's no reason to do it. But sometimes people think, oh, it's cool to quote directly from the original source, but it's not the reason, right? You have to have specific reasons for doing quotation, right? So these are specific reasons. One, quote, if you use another person's word, you must not use other person's word as your own, and so on. So this is basic, right? Number 3 is the most important thing. Quote if the language used in the quotation says what you want to say particularly well. So that's the main reason when you do the direct quotations. You do the direct quotation because the words in the original source are particularly well said, right? And you cannot think of any words that can replace the original wording, right? So that's the most important reason why you do direct quotations. And normally you would do paraphrase. You would do paraphrase because you want to indicate that this is your paper, right? You want to indicate that this is your paper. So what you do when you write a paper is to make everything yours. But if you do a lot of direct quotations when there's no reason to, when there's no special reason to, then it means that you attribute the importance of your work to other people, right? More importantly, when you write a paper, it has to be your voice. Doesn't matter if you read from other sources. You read from those sources in order to give additional examples, in order to use examples to support your point, in order to point the reader to those sources, right, as references, and in order to show that you have adopted some idea. But all in all, your paper is yours. So people don't do a lot of or abundant or too much quotation, because when you do that, it's not your voice anymore. It's somebody else's voice. So you do direct quotations only when there is a reason to do it. And the reason to do it is when the original wording is so important, is so particularly well said that you cannot find any word to replace or to rephrase. Or the original wording is used in an unusual way that, that people might not understand, right? Or for example, when we use words like marked in linguistics, marked, it's not marked meaning we don't mark it with pencil or anything, but marked meaning it raises attention of people. When a particular grammatical structure is marked, it means that it draws attention, right? So in this case, you might want to borrow that word as the direct quotation from the original source, right? Because it's used in a different way than what normal people would understand it. So that's a reason to do the direct quotation, right? And to do the direct quotation, you have so many formulaic expressions to do it. As we talked about before, just just depending on how much responsibility you want to attribute to the original source. To quote from X, as X says, as X states, as X writes, and so on, right? The opinion of X is that. So many formulaic expressions, depending on the context, how does it fit within that paragraph that you are writing about. So don't just use one according to, because it's meaningful which type of expression you use, right? Depending on the responsibility. And also, again, you can do evaluation, whether you agree or not agree, positive, negative, or neutral. So these are formula expressions that you can use or you can think about when you do citations in your own writing, right? And some people ask me whether we should use finds or whether we should use found, or meaning that should it be present tense or should it be past tense? There's no rule regarding the use of present or past, or says or said. There's no rule as to which one you can use, but be what we call consistent when you do it. Typically in literature, people would use the present tense, like Shakespeare says, Shakespeare writes, even though he's dead, right? Shakespeare means, Shakespeare implies, like that, because we discuss the work of literature, right, which is like timeless, true, like that. So that's why the present tense is used. And typically in the scientific fields, like biology and other fields, you use the past tense. He found that, he discovered that, because it's the experiment that people did in the past. So typically the past tense is used, and especially when the experiments are no longer valid, that okay, people discovered this, but it was wrong, like that. So people would tend to use the past tense. In psycholinguistics or in phonetics, people might use the past tense, right? Because it has to do with experiments rather than work of literature, or rather than, you know, discourse analysis and so on. In discourse analysis, we tend to use the present tense when we analyze text, right? So this text begins with, like, the text begins with the theme, let's say whatever, the theme. So we usually use the present tense. We usually use the present tense because we analyze the text, right? And we are not describing any kind of experiments that was done in the past. So in discourse analysis, we usually use the present tense. But there is no hard and fast rule. People differ. People differ in terms of what they think is the tense that they use. But pretty much the rule of thumb is, if you analyze the text, literary text or a newspaper, we use normally the present tense, or how grammar works. So we would use the present tense. But if we are in the scientific fields, that where people conduct experiments, we would use the past tense, especially when the findings are no longer valid. Okay, so we will leave this issue and we'll come to another topic here, which is text pattern, right? So what have we been studying so far? So from the start of the semester, we study cohesion, right? How things are linked together formally depending on different types of links, right? Grammatical links or word links. And then we look at theme and rhyme, right, as the second thing, right? Theme and rhyme. And we look at theme and rhyme is the relationship between sentences, right? Sentences meaning this sentence starts with a theme and ends with a rhyme, and how next sentence would start, right? Does it start with a rhyme, picking up the rhyme from the beginning, or does it start with a theme, and so on? So we look at that, and we look at within the sentence evaluation, right? Evaluation and evidentials last time, and also stance and engagement, right? So which under evaluation. And also averral and attribution, because they are related concept, right? Attribution and the case of academic citation. Right? These are all related concepts, right? Because when you do citation, it's one type of evidential, right? It's a hearsay type of evidential, if you remember. And then if you do citation, it's attribution, like that. Averral is a statement that you make, 100% your own responsibility, right? And so we have been talking about these things. So today we'll do text pattern. And also meta-discourse. Now, after we looked at relationships between things, relationship between words, the relationship between different words and also different grammatical devices, right? Pronouns, references, and so on, and relationship between sentences, and how people indicate their stance or engage the reader or the listener in the discourse. Now we'll come to this topic, which is the biggest topic, biggest in terms of the structural pattern, right? We look at relationship between words and sentences. We look at theme and rhyme, also the relationship between sentences, and then inside the sentence. Now we'll look at the relationship between sentences and also between paragraphs, right? So text patterns or meta-discourse and meta-discourse. Now when we think about text pattern, right, we typically store in our cognitive system, we store different text patterns. After we grow up, after we learn how to read, we come across so many texts, but in terms of our experience, we have stored 3 or 4 types of text patterns, right? And when we read, we typically expect to find certain elements in the text, right? And if those things turn out to be not what we expected, we would be surprised, or we would think that something is wrong, right? And these stored text patterns are problem solutions, hypothetical real, general particular, and claim justification. So we'll go through these text type, okay? So text type meaning, or text type or text patterns meaning how the overall structure of the text, meaning the overall paragraph, right, make a meaningful pattern, right? And that pattern is stored in our cognitive system, right? And we expect to find certain elements to do certain jobs. Right? The most commonly occurring text pattern is problem and solution. Problem and solution, right? Problem and solution is the most frequently occurring text pattern that we have seen. So for the problem solution pattern, you have the following elements. So as I said before, you expect certain elements within one pattern to occur, right? Perhaps in order, right? And if you don't find these elements, you might be surprised, or you might not understand what the text is about. Something is wrong, something is missing. That's the feeling that you might come across if you don't find these elements. So what are these elements? These elements are situation, problem, response, and evaluation or result. So these elements are likely to come in that order. So first you'll see the situation, and then problem, response, evaluation, or result. The situation, right? The situation is kind of the introduction, the background, the setting, like that. And the problem is something that bothers you or something that needs solution, okay? The response is how you deal with the problem, right? And finally, evaluation or result has to do with how you evaluate the response. Is it good response? Is it a good way of solving the problem, or is it not good? Okay. What I'm saying here is that when you come across this problem and solution type, you might see some keywords, right? So if it's in the problem element, you see keywords like concern, difficulty, dilemma, drawback, obstacle, or even an actual question. Do you have a headache? Is linguistics too difficult? Right? Actual question that presents a problem, right? So these words are keywords that tell you that you have a problem and solution text pattern, right? Why? Because these words show that they are problematic, right? Concern, difficulty, dilemma, drawback, like that. And then response to the problem, you might see words like change. Change is how you respond to the situation, to the problematic situation. Combat, come up with, meaning how to solve the problem, right? Develop, find, respond, like that. So these are keywords telling you that you have the response element. And then evaluation and results, you might see words like, oh, effective or ineffective if it's not good, manage, overcome, succeed, successful or unsuccessful, and work. So these are keywords that tell you that you have the problem and solution pattern, okay? So let's look at some examples. I was on sentry duty, meaning sentry duty, patrolling duty. Perhaps this person is a soldier or a police officer, typically military. Sentry duty, so that's the situation, right? Background, setting. And then I saw the enemy approaching. That's the problem, right? Problem. I saw the enemy approaching. The response is, I tried to open fire, but the gun's bolt jammed. So I stay calm, I apply a drop of oil, that did the trick, I open fire and blah, blah, blah. Finally, I beat off the attacker. So that's the evaluation, right? So here you see different elements nicely come out in, let's see, in a sentential unit, right? I was on sentry duty, that's the situation. I saw the enemy approaching, that's the problem, right? So you can nicely distinguish between different parts. However, in reality, one element may be in the form of a phrase rather than a sentence, okay? That's possible. Not the full sentence, but a phrase, right? So in text 1, let's look at some text, for example, right? For example, as examples. In text 1, you see, one of the irritations for joggers, right, is having to stop every 5 or 10 minutes and retie their shoelaces. One of the irritations for joggers is having to stop every 5 or 10 minutes and retie their shoelaces. Here, both the situation and the problem are fused into the same sentence, right? One of the irritation for joggers, you know that the introduction or the situation here is that joggers, right, they jog around. And the problem here is in the same sentence that they have to stop and retie their shoelaces every 5 or 10 minutes. So problem and situation are fused into one. It's not nicely separated into 2 different sentences, but here in one. You learn about the situation and also you learn about the problem, right? The problem is he has to stop and tie the shoelaces every 5 or 10 minutes, right? The situation is that this is a jogging situation, exercising situation. Now in 2, a new device, the lace lock, puts an end to those involuntary pauses, right? In number 2, you have the response, right? You have the response. And also the evaluation is there, right? It's fused into one. Puts an end to, meaning that it not only solves the problem, but it also solves the problem successfully, right? Put an end to. So you see the keyword put an end to, right? In the first one, first sentence, irritation is your keyword, right? That is a problem. And in the second one, you have the response and also positive evaluation, right? And then what else you have? The laces are threaded through at the ends of a simple plastic barrel. This is pushed down, the tie is then completed. The shoes stay done up throughout a bout of running, cycling, and squash playing. Also here contribute to the evaluation, right? Successful, positive evaluation, positive results. You have keywords like completed. You have things like stay done up throughout, stay done up throughout, meaning that it successfully, it will not occur again like that. So this is one example of the problem solution text type, right? Or in text 2, another example in text 2 is also under the problem and solution pattern. This is from a paper, academic paper. This is the outline of the paper or the abstract of the paper, right? So we have things like, we now accept that grammar is not restricted to writing but is present, can you correct that? It is present in speech also. So that's the situation, right? So that's the situation. We now accept. So the situation is that we accept that grammar is not restricted to writing but is present in speech as well. That's the situation. The problem is this can lead to assumptions that there is one kind of grammar for writing and for speech. So that's the problem, statement of problem. When we do research, we have the research questions, right? And statement of questions or research questions are problems that you have to solve. So a large-scale corpus survey of English has been undertaken. This is the response, what you do to solve the problem. And finally, results show the same system is valid for both writing and speech. That's the evaluation and result, right? Positive also. The same system is valid. So most of the text that we see in our daily life, most of the texts are under this pattern, right? Problem and solution. When you write your thesis, that's problem and solution for sure, right? Because you have to have major questions, research questions, you have to do the experiments or analysis, and then you do the results. So that's also under the problem and solution pattern, okay? The last example before we take a break here is my love story. So this is a long text, but it falls under the problem and solution also. For example, it starts off as, one wet day, Mary was bored and decided to go up into the attic to see what she could find. So here we have the situation and also the problem, right? One wet day, we know that the situation is like that. And the problem is she was bored, right? She was bored, and the response is she decided to go up in the attic to see what she could find. So everything is filled in here, right? And then, what else? After a while, she came down looking very excited. She had an idea. She could not go into the attic. It's too dirty because she had her best dress on. Too dirty, she could not go because she dressed so beautifully. That's the results, or that's the result and the evaluation, right? Is it positive or negative here? The result is she had an idea. She could not go into the attic. It's too dirty, for she had her best dress on. This is negative evaluation, negative result, right? Because first she was bored, that's the problem. So she responded to it by thinking that she could go up into the attic to see what she could do. She could play like that. She could play with. But then doing that is not a good idea because of her nicest dress. So the result is not something that's desirable. So it's negative result. So she went to the swimming bath and learned how to swim. That's another response, right? That's another response. She went to the swimming bath and learned how to swim. She learned how to do it very well indeed. She learned the backstroke and the front stroke, right? She learned the doggy paddle as well, but she got bored soon. You see, in these things, you have positive evaluation. She went to the swimming bath, that's the response, right, of not being able to go into the attic. That's the response. And then it's positive evaluation. She learned how to do it very well. She learned the backstroke and the front stroke. She learned the doggy style, the doggy paddle as well, but she got bored soon. That's another problem, right? She got bored soon and then went to find something else. She found a sport, went to find something else is the response, next response. She found a sports class and she won 3 races and lost 1, but she soon got bored of that too. So you see the positive evaluation. She found a sports class and she won 3 races and lost 1, but soon she got bored of that too. That's another problem, right? And then she found a church and she thought, I haven't got a husband, and she got married and you know what, and so on. So you have another response again. So what I would like to point out with this thing is that the pattern can be repeated, right? So you have a situation here, okay? And then it leads to the response, right? No problem. And then it leads to the response like this, right? But the response can be positive or negative, negative or positive. Okay, the response can be positive or negative. If it's negative, what do we do? If it's negative, the response or the evaluation, the response that we do, right? And this is the evaluation part, right? I'm sorry. So this is the evaluation part, which can be positive or negative. If it's negative, what do we do? It can create, or it still remains a problem, right? So it goes back to the same problem or a new problem even, right? And then when you have a problem, you have to find a way to solve the problem, right? If you did it successfully, then you might come to the positive side. But if it's still not satisfactory, you still have the negative part, right? Negative result. So it will remain a problem once again. And the pattern can repeat like this as a loop until perhaps you go to the other side where it's positive, okay? In this case, Mary, the situation is it's a wet day and she was bored, right? Which is here. So she tried to find so many things to do. The first response is she wanted to go to the attic, right? But she could not, right? She could not, so it's negative, still boring for her. So it's still the problem of boredness, right? Boredom. And then the second response is she learned how to swim, right? And she did it so well. However, is bored still to her. So it has become a problem once again. It could be like that. So the pattern could be recycled or could be repeated, right? Many times. So you have a longer text. So the problem here can repeat itself, right? The problem is perhaps the same problem, right? Or it could be a new problem, right? This is the same as in the first text that you see on the first page. I was on sentry duty. I saw the enemy approaching, okay? The first text that we saw. I tried to open fire. The problem is I saw the enemy approaching. That's the first problem, right? So you want to respond to the enemy is you want to shoot them, right? You want to shoot them. So I try to open fire. That's how you respond to the problem. But then another problem arises. The guns bolt jammed. That's another problem that you have to solve, right? More immediate than the enemy approaching. So you have to solve that problem first, which is you have to stay calm and you apply a drop of oil that did the trick. So you come back to the original problem. I open fire and so on, right? So if theoretically speaking, the text could be longer because the pattern will be repeated. So I open fire. However, the enemy fire back to me, right? And so on. The text could be longer if there are more problems coming, right? So again, this pattern can be repeated over and over again, theoretically speaking. So the text will be longer. But this is the most commonly occurring type of text pattern which we have stored in our brain. Right? And after the break, we'll come back and see other types of text pattern that are also frequent but not as frequent as the problem solution. Okay? Situation, the problem, and the response, and then evaluation. And typically, the problem and solution pattern ends with a positive evaluation or positive result. If not, people usually retell or reuse or repeat the structure to show that the problem remains or the problem is still persistent, so that they find another way of dealing with the problem and so that they can reach the positive result or positive evaluation. So that's the typical pattern that we expect to find, right? And the second pattern is the claim or counterclaim part, right? So the claim, counterclaim, or some people might call it hypothetical and real. So I think that in my opinion, the claim and counterclaim is more revealing, is more illuminating. I prefer the term claim and counterclaim rather than hypothetical and real. So for this pattern, you have two parts only, two elements only, the claim part and the counterclaim part, or the hypothetical part and the real part. So two parts, right? So the first part, the claim part, tries to construct what the theory or the experience would predict, right? So that's the claim or the hypothetical, and then the counterclaim, counter is against, right? Counter means against, like counterclockwise, for example. So counter is against. So meaning that the counterclaim would do is to argue against that claim, right? To argue against the original claim that something is wrong and then some new thing is more illuminating, right? So for the claim part, you might see common words that signal the claim part, like claim, assert, argue, and so on, right? Something that shows your reservation, shows your non-commitment to the original proposal, like that. And for the counterclaim part, you might see things like in reality, in fact, like in Korean it's right? So in reality, in fact, and so on. Counterpose, false, truth, evidence, and so on. The evidence is that, the reality is that, and so on, right? So again, in order to tell what type of text it is, you have to look at some signaling words. For problem and solution, you have signaling words like the problem is, the concern is, the difficulty is, right? The solution might be to solve the problem, or one solution is blah, 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 right? Or find out, or eliminate it, and so on. For the claim and counterclaim, again, you will have one of these words, claim, assert, or argue, and then in reality, in fact, or evidence, and so on. In text 4, let's look at text 4 as an example of the hypothetical real situation. Every other critic has said that On Food and Cooking, that's the name of the book, is brilliant, a revelation and a unique combination of scientific insight and literary, which sweeps aside all myth and jargon as none have done before. So in this case, it seems to be the positive evaluation of the book, right? Because every other critic has said so nice things about this part. And then second one is also a positive evaluation. McGee's book is indeed well written, is full of good things, and is good to have on the shelves as a continuing source of reference and quotes. Number 3, but it also has its fair share of mistakes, omissions, and misalignments of emphasis. So number 3 here, you see it is signaled by the word but, right? But in reality, you can put it there, but in reality, it also has its fair share of mistakes, omissions, and misalignments of emphasis, and so on. So from 1 to 2, from 1 and 2, you have the hypothetical or the claim part, right? So some people claim, in other words, some people claim that the book is good, right? In number 3, you have the counterclaim part or the real part, but in my opinion, but in reality, it's not that good, and so on. So 1 and 2 are the hypothetical part or the claim part, and 3 is the real part. Okay? So this one is common also, right? We usually use that when we do evaluation, when we do academic writing also, right? So this guy claims that blah, blah, blah. However, that theory is not good, and so on. Number 3, the third type is generalization to detail. Right? This one is easy. You start from a broad statement and then you have so many details. And this one is normally for what we call the clarification text, clarification or explanation. Right? So when you want to clarify stuff, when you want to explain what something is, you usually use that type of text, right? Generalization and then the details, right? When you want to explain, when you want to give definition, right? Explanation, definition type. As an example, text 5 on your handout, text 5, right? It starts out with number 1, sentence 1. A poem differs from most prose in several ways, right? So here you want to explain, you want to define what a poem is, right? So you start out from the first step, which is generalization. Generalization is like a general statement, the broadest statement, from broad, so this is broad, to details, right? This is also a frequent type of text type. A poem differs from prose in several ways. You see the keyword here is several ways, right? Several ways, that's a more generalized statement. So for 1, number 2 is the first detail, several ways. First, for 1, both writer and reader tend to regard it differently, right? And then number 3, the poet attitude is also different, and so on, right? And in sentence 4, this is a great deal to expect, but in return, the reader has a right to his own expectations. He approaches the poem, and so on. So you get into more details about the most general statement here, right? So this is the third type of statement. With the first sentence in text 5 as the generalized statement, and then other things are more detailed. Okay? And finally, claim and justification. So claim to justification. Here you have a claim, right? Somebody proposes something, or you yourself propose something, and then you try to justify the claim by giving evidence, by giving support, right? Here, it's different from, let's see, number 2. It's different from number 2 a bit, because in number 2, you try to argue against the original claim, but in this case, you try to support it, right? So perhaps it's the opposite of number 2, right? In text 6, for example, in text 6 on your handout, this is a lecture in a marketing class, right? So it starts out with a claim. It's a real SME structure. He's talking about something as having a real SME structure, right? Look at this, and then he points to the presentation slide or presentation transparency. On the top from left to right, you find 0 to 49 employees. That's one category. So that's the first evidence, right? That it has the SME structure, small business structure. So that means 40,000 SMEs, and that sums up to 99.5 of all companies, and only 5% are bigger than that SME. So it's a real SME structure. you see that here he's trying to bring in many pieces of evidence in order to support that it has the SME structure like that. Or in the second one, well, we have seen a shifting of production overseas, so that's the claim, right? And then you have evidence. This graph shows the percentage of the Japanese manufacturing industry produced overseas. So big increase in the percentage of Japanese or Japan's marketing or Japan's manufacturing industry actually produced overseas and so on. Same thing, you have the claim and you have the justification trying to support the claim. Okay? So that's also a common text pattern. So there are only 4 common text patterns that we have stored in our cognitive system. But the most common one is probably problem and solution that we use every day in our life, right? But other things are so common, right? Perhaps as common as problem and solution, right? But in academic writing, this perhaps is the dominant, right? It's the dominant text pattern because when you do a paper, you have to have research questions, you do the experiment, which is the response, and then you do the evaluation, which is the result. But then other things are so common. You need claim and counterclaim as you can build that claim and counterclaim as part of your thesis, right? That other researchers had argued that X and Y and Z, but I don't agree with that. So the claim and counterclaim can be built under problem and solution. And then when you want to explain something in your paper, you use the generalization and detailed. When you want to define things, right? When you want to define things, when you want to clarify things. So you can use that in this problem and solution pattern as well. And the claim and justification, in order to come up with a good result, you must have some argument, right? You must build some argument and you provide support for it, right? So you can build it under the problem and solution, right? So what this means is that a text can be very, very long, but the text itself consists of many, many patterns, right? Even though the predominant pattern might be the problem solution when you write your thesis or when you write your paper, itself is embedded. Many patterns are embedded within that problem and solution, right? So the claim and counterclaim part could be 1 paragraph, or could be 2 sentences, could be 3 sentences, I don't know, but it could be however long it can be, right? And then the claim and then the generalization in detail could be 1 paragraph or 1 section of your paper, right? And the claim and justification should be another part, could be another part of your paper. So what this means is that you can mix and match, or you can group, you can put other patterns within the problem and solution. Or this could happen in the opposite direction too, that you have the claim and justification paper, right? Or you have a generalization in detail paper, and you use problem and solution text pattern as one detail, for example. So anything is possible, meaning that one text can exhibit many types of text patterns within it. Okay, that's possible. So what we'll do now is we'll look at different text type, right? And I'll have you work in pair also. We have, this one is a little bit long, so I'll give you perhaps 5 to 10 minutes. We have 6 or 7, so let's do one each. So this pair is number 1, 2, 3, 4, you guys 4. So you have to identify the text type, right? The text pattern, discourse pattern. Again, look at the keyword, right? Look at the moves of the text, right? Okay, so let's hear from the first group. So what text type do you see as the first, as in the first example?
I think this is claim counter.
맞아요. So this is clear, right? Look at the keywords here in the first text, right? Historians are generally agreed, right? I underline agree. Generally agreed that British society is founded on a possessive individualism, but they have disputed the origin of that philosophy. So agree, this, and then dispute it. So claim and then counterclaim, right? And other underlined words also, consensus, and then seen, and then although most would accept that, they would also acknowledge, although. So there's a contrast there, although they would accept it, they would also say it a different way. And also other words like counterpose, or view, or evidence, or seen, right? So these are the things that tell you that this is the claim and counterclaim, which is the second type, right? So here we talk about many different ideas, many different opinions as to the origin and to the idea of individualism, but people not always agree, right? So we have the claim and then counterclaim throughout this portion of the text. Okay? This may come from a longer prose, right? A longer piece of prose where it's problem and solution, like that. Okay? So you look at the keywords, okay, to determine the type of text. Number 2, what type of text is it? Look at the keywords, right? The keyword is, yeah, face a crisis, coping with the demand, the problem, and adopted, have adopted, no, not adopted, that's adopted the view, not adopted the solution. The problem, right? We have other things like in the last paragraph, examples from other countries demonstrate that there are alternative ways of tackling the issue, alternative ways of tackling the issue. That is an alternative way to solve the problem, right? Tackling the issue. So based on these things, you say what would you say to be the pattern, to be the text pattern based on these keywords? Problem and solution, right? So we have problem, crisis in coping with the demands made by welfare provision, and then many countries have dealt with it differently, right? So you have different ways of solving the problem. So it's measuring. This is in the total, the overall portion is the problem and solution pattern. However, you might see other patterns, as in this is towards the end of the second paragraph, 4 lines up from the end. Some have argued against these age-dense solutions. Solution is another keyword, right, for problem and solution pattern. But here we have argue against these. So this is claim and counterclaim, right? So because of the word argue against. So here the dominant pattern is problem and solution because we see a lot of problem words or solution words, but we also see some have argued against. This is the counterclaim part, right? So the counterclaim is built in within the problem and solution pattern, okay? So which is possible. So good. So number 3. So let's move on to number 3.
The keyword is in the second paragraph. On the other hand, so we chose hypothetical here.
So claim and counterclaim, right? Claim and counterclaim, which is good. So claim and counterclaim here. So in number 1, we have local authorities believe strongly in something, right? So believe strongly. So that's the claim or the hypothetical, right? And then, however, in the second paragraph, we have a different way of thinking about things. Central government, on the other hand, places more faith. Faith is belief, right? So places more faith in blah, blah, blah. So this is claim and counterclaim, right? And we have other words like believe, like think, hold the opinion, right? They hold that. Production is the key. This is in the first paragraph towards the middle. And since they hold meaning think, hold the idea, hold and think. And then you have different examples of think and considers and place more faith in and so on. So these have to do with ideas, right? And then you have 2 different sides. So this is under the claim and counterclaim, which is the second pattern, okay? Number 4. So number 4.
Number 4 is the whole
Claim and justification.
The second part, because it's the sequence is like hypothesis and real.
Where is the hypothetical?
The second part.
But even if your hotel choice is a little more modest, you will still be forking out nearly twice. And where's the original claim though?
It is no surprise that London is the most expensive.
Where is it? Claim and counterclaim, right? You have to have two different sides of things, right? So if the second paragraph is you still be forking out nearly twice as much for a night stay in London as elsewhere. So the claim has to be something different, right? But the claim that you said is in the first paragraph is London is expensive. So they both seem to say the same thing. So we cannot say that that's the claim and counterclaim because they say the same thing.
I didn't say
Right?
claim and counterclaim. I said claim and justification.
Claim and justification, sorry. So claim and justification, right? Claim and justification. So we have the claim and then the evidence, right? You take the evidence from where? According to the international hotel consultants, Howard and blah, 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 and you cite the rate, right? The hotel rate. And then in the second one, you have the rate also, right? So we have claim and justification here, okay? So what we'll do now is we'll switch to the other one because I want to I want to finish this off before we run out of time. So what we'll do next week is we'll talk about every concept that we have studied until this point and do practice next week, okay? So now we'll move on to page, I don't know, page, let's see, page 7, right? Page 7, meta discourse. So we talked about text type and we'll talk about meta discourse, right? Meta discourse is very, 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 very important in all pieces of writing and all types of spoken interaction, right? Because meta means above, right? Above. We don't usually talk about the content of something just by itself. We also talk about how we present the content. So in other words, there's this content, right? So for example, if you talk about how to make talk making, there are so many types of talk, jin talk, right? Steam talk, and then the talk that you have to like hit and poke like that. I studied this in my Korean class, right? So how to make talk, how to make the Korean rice cake. There are so many kinds of rice cake, 4 types of rice cake and so on, right? So that's the content part, right? How to make talk. Let's say how to make talk, right? Talk like that. Now, that's the content part, but the idea of meta discourse is we also say something about how we make that text. So meta discourse is about how we make that text, how we make the content, So the level above the text, the content part, which has to do with how we make the content. Okay? Not the content itself, but it's how we make the content, how we make the text, how we talk about how to make talk. Okay? So this is a different level than the text. Okay? So, for example, just use the same example. Today, I will talk about talk. First, I will define talk. Second, I will present 4 types of thought like that. Here, all of this is what we call meta discourse. Okay? Because is this about the content? Meaning, is this about different types of thought, right? Or is this about how to make thought? No, it's about how I make that text, how I will talk about thought, how I will talk about the content, right? So this, what I do is to give the reader, to give the listener the plan, to give the listener the plan. I talk about the plan of the text, right? The steps, different steps of that text. I tell you how to process, plan, and how to process the text, the content, right? If you have this, then it's easier for you to follow my idea, right? Because you see the different steps. First, I'll do this. Second, I'll do this. Third, I'll do this, right? And this is to tell you my intention, right? So again, meta discourse is not the text itself, but it's something about the text, right? We talk about how we make the text itself, right? And typically when we use meta discourse, we tell the reader or the listener about the plan that we have in mind, about how to process the information, how to process the content. So it's not the content itself, it's not the issue that we talk about itself, but it's how we present the information, how we present the content, right? So how we present, how the information is presented, right? So this has to do with meta discourse, right? Meta, above discourse, above the content, okay? And the key word here is that it's the reflexive function. Meta discourse has a reflexive function. Reflect is to think, right? To think. So meaning that it's not the actual content itself, but it's how we think about the content, how we tell other people about the content. So this is not the real world. This is the discourse world, right? The real world is the content world. That's the text world, or that's the real world, right? But the meta discourse is the discourse world, right? So see some more examples here on page 7, right? Number 1, see page 16. See page 16 is not about talk itself, let's say, but I refer the reader to other sources, right? See, go and see page 16. So it's not about the content, but it's something else, something extra. Or in brief is not about the talk itself, but it's how I tell the reader that I will say this briefly, like that. To conclude, I tell the reader that this is the conclusion, right? Or strictly speaking, again, to say it in detail, to say it more correctly, like that. Or I will summarize, tell the reader that this is my summary, or blah, blah, blah will be discussed below. This is not the actual content, but it's how I present my content, right? Or number 2, you'll probably think that, or doesn't this sound familiar to you? Doesn't this sound surprising to you, and so on. Correct me if I'm wrong, but, and as you will see, and so on. So these are not the content itself, but it's how we relate to the listener, right? How we draw their attention. And these are not the content itself, okay? So meta discourse is important in creating and also reading the text, and the reader's understanding of an impression of an attitude toward a text depend very much on the meta discourse. Okay, so meta discourse is obligatory in the sense of having your text look like or appear persuasive to people. So that's important, right? It's not compulsory in the sense of syntactic requirement or any semantic requirement, but it's important in terms of processing your text. Okay. Let's see. The same word, it doesn't have to do with words, right? Because the same word, like the word intent could be a meta discourse or not, depending on at what level it functions. If it functions in the content level, then the word intent is not meta discourse. But if the word intent is not the content itself, then it's a meta discourse. Let's look at some examples. Okay? This is in the table here on the page. The text world or discourse world, meaning that it's the meta discourse, okay? And the real world is the world of the content, okay? So the text world or the discourse world, that's the meta discourse, right? In this essay, I intend to give a few examples of why college life is useful. So this is a writing piece about college life. So here the word intent is a meta discourse because it's not about college life itself here, but it's about how the writer is trying to present the information or what he tries to do. This is his purpose. It's not about the college life itself. So intent here is a meta discourse expression. But in the next two examples, throughout my college career, I intended my studies to be. This is real. This is the real world, right? This is the stuff. Not about the writing itself, but about the real world, his intention in the real world. So it's not meta discourse. Or another problem is what students intend to use education for, what other people intend to use education for. Intent here is the real verb in the real world. This is the content that he wants to tell you, right? It's not about the process of writing or not the process of speaking. So intent in these two examples are not meta discourse, okay? So it doesn't have to do with the form of the word, but it has to do with what level it is used in. So if it's used as part of the real world story, meaning the content part, then it's not meta discourse. But if it has to do with the process of writing, planning, processing, presenting information, then that is meta discourse, right? And let's see. There are two types of meta discourse that you should pay attention to. The first one is text-oriented. The second one, this is on the next page, the second one is participant-oriented, right? So text-oriented, this is easy, has to do with text. Has to do with text, not the people. Meaning that you typically do all types of relationship with text, and this is in the table here that you can see on page 8. There are many categories under the text-oriented meta-discourse. So typically, the function of text-oriented meta-discourse relies in the text side, right? So you talk about the text, the discourse itself. Phorics, you see the first example, the first group, the first category, phorics. Phorics has to do with various portions. Phorics point to various portions in the current text. They are like road signs of a text. You remember when we did cohesion, we talk about endophoric, exophorics, right? So those are phorics, right? So things that refer to different types, different parts of text, different portions of text. Like as we shall see in chapter 6. That's not the stuff, that's not the content stuff, but that's to refer to another portion. Or as I noted above, as I noted earlier, go and see table 2, or the paper begins with, the paper ends with, finally, first, second, and third. These present different orders, right? Different parts, different portions, so they are under the phoric part. So now you see why they are text-oriented, because they have to do with the text rather than with the people. And then the second one, code glosses have to do with giving more information or restating, giving a different definition, like briefly speaking, bluntly put, i.e., that is, or namely, and so on, right? And logical connectors, you connect ideas to several kinds of relationship, however, in contrast, yet, consequently, therefore, and so on, right? And then discourse labels, you name the discourse acts, like the question is, the answer is easy, for instance, for example, meaning that what follows, you name what follows, right? The aim, the intention, you name what follows as the aim and the intention. The question is, blah, 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 you name what follows as the question, and so on. And then you can do defining, what do we mean by blank, what do we mean by talk then, and so on. Saying, what I'm saying is, you repeat the information. Introducing the topic, I will discuss this and this. Focusing, concluding, when you do the conclusion, in conclusion, I would say, and so on. Exemplifying, as an example, take blank as an example, and then reminding, and so on, right? And you have a few more different types. Arguing, which is important, I argue that. And then contextualizing, I have chosen this subject because, and so on. So these are text-oriented, right? And the other type is personal meta-discourse. Personal meaning participant-oriented meta-discourse, right? So they have to do with the listener or the reader, right? You might do something that anticipates the reader's reaction by saying, you might be surprised at, I do realize that, or clarifying, and so on. So these are what we have come across as the engagement, right? Engagement, we looked at engagement before. So these are under engagement. So now, to summarize what we have talked about so far, meta-discourse in relation to other things that we have studied. So meta-discourse is not the content itself. So meta-discourse will stand here, okay? And then we talk about evaluation, remember? Stance and engagement, right? So stance and engagement evaluation that we studied maybe 2 weeks before, stance and engagement will be here, right? So this is the discourse world. Discourse world. And this is the real world. Meaning this is the stuff, the content, the real part, where we give our attitudes towards something, where we engage the reader, right? And then here, they both belong in the text, right? They both belong in a text. So you can think of your text as consisting of 2 levels. The first level is the discourse world, where we normally talk about how we produce the text, how people should process the text, right? And then the real world, which is the text, right? The text itself, the content itself. So meta-discourse stands kind of apart from that, that text. So this is the text or the content itself, right? The text or the content would be here. What matters is that you know that meta-discourse is very important. So because the content itself, of course, is important, right? Because it's the gist, it's the heart of what you want to say. But along the way of saying something, you have to help the reader or the listener process the information, process the text. And how to do that? To use meta-discourse. To rephrase things, to show that it's the conclusion, to give context, to refer to other parts of the text. So meta-discourse will function, will fulfill those functions. Okay? Now we'll spend about 10 minutes trying to tease apart the 2 levels of text here, right? So what we'll do is we'll use this paper, right? We'll use this paper. This is a paper by Ken Highland, who is very, very prolific writer. Here in this paper, he analyzes the use of the word, the expression "as can be seen" that people use in academic writing, right? So what we'll do is, can you circle discourse? Meta-discourse expressions in this paper, right? So, for example, Here in the introduction, let's start with the introduction, okay? So he starts off saying, multi-word expressions are an important component of fluent linguistic production, meaning that people who are fluent in a language, they should have the knowledge of multi-word expressions, like as can be seen, for example, or as stated above, as mentioned above, like that. So this is what we call multi-word expressions, okay? So are an important component of fluency, linguistic fluency, and a key factor in successful language learning. Not only words, right? While students might struggle to master phrasal verbs such as look after and sell out, or idioms like in a nutshell or beat around the bush, these are relatively rare compared with the frequently occurring word sequences, which Biber, blah, 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 call lexical bundles, and Scott referred to as cluster. Here, do you see any not discourse marker, meta-discourse markers? Something that's not the content itself, but things that are used to relate things, to point to another portion of the text, or to point to the source, and so on. You see the second line, while. You see, while. While students might struggle to master phrasal verbs, these are relatively rare, right? While, meaning that the two ideas are in contrast, right? In contrast, right? And then nothing else until essentially these are words which follow each other more frequently than expected by chance, helping to shape blah, blah, blah. Thus, you see the word thus. So these are logical connectors, right, that we talked about. They are text-oriented. Thus, the presence of such extended collocations like, the word like. The word like is an example, right? The word like is a meta-discourse. Naming that what follows is an example, like, right? Help identify a text as belonging to a researcher, while, you see another one, while, are likely to mark out a legal text, and so on. So can you spend maybe 2 minutes circling, right? Circling or underlining, right? Meta-discourse markers, okay? Until the end of the page. Something that's not the content itself, something that's not about what he is talking about, but it's about what he is talking about. Okay, maybe everyone is done. So page 5, one word that I skipped is in the first line, essentially. Essentially is, you are giving definition here, essentially, right? So you use essentially when you want to give the perhaps most basic definition, right? So essentially, and where were we? Third line, thus, right? You see thus, right? And then we have like already, right? And then while in that paragraph towards the end, right? And then the next paragraph we have conversely, right? Conversely, and for example, right? For example, as well, for example. Where is that? Suggest? You said suggest?
Yeah, kind of.
Suggest that, right? The word suggest. You name what follows as the suggestion, right? And then what else? In other words, and then so, right? So if learning to use, right? So, and then in the last paragraph, yet, while, and e.g. E.g. is examples, right? This is the first line of the last paragraph, e.g., the very last word, e.g. And then what else? Yeah, forthcoming is just the meaning the year, right? Instead of year, you have forthcoming. Forthcoming is used for something that's not in print yet, but it's, I'm sorry, that is still in print. That's still in press, but not come out yet. Okay, so forthcoming. Let's see. This is the issue until the end, right? This is the issue I addressed in this paper, examining, blah, 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 right? So that's the whole thing, right? The whole thing is meta discourse. And then what else? I'm sorry? No, because the study here, not this study, but it's some other studies, not the actual study, not the present study. The study of formulaic patterns has a long and distinguished history. It's not the present study. He doesn't refer to the study that he's doing. This present study, not like that, but this is the study that other people have already done. So what else? More recently, and for instance, you see, for instance, and then argue, right? Argue. For instance, argue that, and then you see, such as the extensive use of such fabricated sequences as. It has been noted that such as meaning examples, right? Such as meaning examples. And then what else? For instance, and then in the next paragraph you have so many, right? Therefore, thus, while, and what I shall call, right? What I shall call bundles, right? What I shall call bundles. And then or this is the rephrasing or code clause, right? Bundles or in other words, or here is in other words. So it's also a meta discourse. And then what else? The key idea here is that. So I'm telling you, this is what you want to focus on. The key idea here is that. Of collocation, or the word or is code clause, right? Or here is not to select one or the other, but it means in other words, okay? So what we'll do next time is to do a review of what we have talked about so far in terms of cohesion, theme and rhyme, evaluation, meta discourse, and other things that we've talked about, okay? So I'll come back next Wednesday with the take-home exam, and I'll tell you how to process, how to tackle the exam. Okay? So thank you for today, and I'll see you guys back here next Wednesday.